feel fortunate that I think as much as anything can be irreplaceable, I think that story is probably probably a good place to start, looking. In fact, I've told students that for many, many years. I'm like, if I meet young people and they're like, I want to be an animator, I'm like, get into story. It's got the most job security. A good story artist will always work. The movie Jaws is as good as it is because of the limitation that the damn shark did not work. And I've worked on projects a lot in my life where we were told you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, and you have to come up with something better. And oftentimes you come up with something even better than what it was before. That you're in the outset, you're like, ugh, we can't use that joke, they don't like it. So you come up with something that's even better, that's subversive or whatever. So again, back to Jaws. Every day they're going out expecting to go shoot this, and somebody goes, the shark's not working again, and he's like, damn it. And so he has to very quickly, because he's thinking, I'm going to lose my job here. They're going to come and take the budget away and fire us all. And so he's like, well, we'll go shoot this. And he just on the fly, he's going and shooting other things to make it work. And in the end, that movie is so damn good because you don't ever see the shark. Same with Alien, the original Alien. That alien puppet is kind of lame. I happen to know a guy that does visual effects. He's working on a movie that has something in it where it sounds like, wow, that's going to be really cool. But they've made something that's so technologically advanced as a costume that they'll, just because they spent the money building it, they're going to show it all the time. Like a Michael Bay movie. It's everything's just moving and moving and moving and moving, and it just becomes not very interesting because you've shown so much of it. You with regards to this thing, this guy's working on, and again, I can't get into the details of it, but he was like, we figured out how to do something with gyroscopes in this costume of this monster that they'll tell it, look at David. And so this creature will keep eyes on you while it's, following you around without a puppeteer having to do that. And that's fascinating. That's really, really cool. But I'm curious if the movie will be really awesome because they'll show the hell out of it. It won't be special when you're forced into limitation. It makes you more creative. It really does. I mean, it's limitations make cooler product. And if AI can do anything, again, that's what they're going to do. They're going to put it out there, and it's like, wow, look at this, and it'll be cool for a minute. You'll look at it and go, wow, that's spectacular looking. But where's the soul? Right? Painting cells for animation was too expensive. So Pixar developed the CAPS system to paint cells instead of people. And that just erased a whole part of the industry. Overnight, it was gone. Like you just tell a computer to paint the drawings and it was done. I think it's conceivable that it'll get down to where movies are just not made with a crew of 400. You get it down to a tight crew of a director, the production designer, couple of story artists, producer, and you playing your sandbox together, coming up with the movie, and then maybe a handful of animators who are really, really gifted or whatever, the easy stuff to AI, and maybe that's the way it'll happen. So I mean, it'll certainly shift stuff. Trying to come up with the acting, to me, that's a blast. But I only have to draw it once. I don't have to draw it 47 times. When I was still at Disney before I left, there was a time when I was on some downtime, and they asked me to do this board for this stuff, and nobody was attached to it at the time. And I thought, man, if I could get on this project, like in a leadership position, because again, they were giving it to this studio out of Nigeria was going to do it, but they weren't great artists. They had an idea that everybody was excited about, but initially they had said they're going to pair them up with somebody that's more kind of senior and knows what they're doing to work together to make this series. And I was like, oh my God, this is a great opportunity. So I did this board trying to really blow their minds. I really tried to draw this to the best of my ability. So they didn't really have a clear idea of what they wanted to have happen. They just wanted this villain, this main character, is kind of a giant guy, big, heavy, fat, but also tall, kind of a mafia figure, walking on the streets of Lagos on the phone. That was really the marching order. And they said this guy thinks of himself as a Robin Hood type figure. He's a bad guy, but he thinks of himself as noble. And that phrase, a Robin Hood type figure, kind of inspired this idea. So um, here he comes walking down the street, and he's talking on the phone to somebody that owes him money. And he's like, shh, calm down. Why is your voice trembling? Just get me my money. And he's passing people, and he's on the phone, and he stops here and buys an apple from this vendor, and the guy zaps his phone, and he paid for the apple. And he's walking along kind of threatening whoever it is that he's talking to, and passes this alley, and these kids are kicking a soccer ball around. And he comes to a stop, and he's on the phone listening, and then he kind of gets incensed, and now he's really pissed, and he's like really threatening this whoever it is he's talking to. And the ball bonks him in the back of the head, and he turns around, and these kids are like, "Uh-oh." And he looks down, and he kind of toes the ball up, and he goes, boot, kicks it back to him. And then you hear like a cash register, ding, like he's been paid. And he goes, ah, good boy. Now get me so-and-so on the phone. And then he leaves. So this was just this little quick thing that I did. But again, back to the animation thing. When I was an animator, I had to do the 100 billion drawings in the middle. Plus, I wasn't getting really good scenes. But storyboarding gives me the whole sequence. I lay out what's going on, how the characters get into the situation, how they respond, how it resolves. And that to me is just the best part of this job. And getting to do stuff like this, these expressions, I have such fun. I was taking it for granted that people were exposed to great old cartoons and anime and choosing anime because they liked it aesthetically. But I'm finding, because now there are so many people coming into the industry, that their influences are clearly only anime. And that can be a detriment. That it's not absolute that you won't get hired if that's your portfolio. But so many of them, the portfolios look so similar. I met this young girl recently who's just right out of high school. And I'm very impressed with her ability. That in my life, and I'm sure you've had this happen in your life too, where you meet somebody and you become friends with them, and they go, "Oh, hey, you have an interesting job. I have a friend, or my friend's kid wants to do what you do. Would you meet them?" And then you meet them, and there's no. I have yet to, in my whole life, I've never met anybody that took it seriously. That if I gave them, well, you could work on this. Why don't you try this and then get back to me in a week or two? Never, ever has that happened until this girl. And I see her stuff, and she's painfully shy, and she's going through it. And I'm looking at this stuff going, wow, this girl draws as easily as good as some people in the industry. And she's cinematic, and she thinks camera, and she unlike a lot of young people, she's not going, I want to be an animator. She's specifically going, I want to be a story artist. And I'm like, that's rare. That's unusual. She's only 18. She's, college age kid. My assumption was that kids were exposed to all this different cartooning. And I was talking about this, and I said, look at this. And I show her Mad Magazine, and I show her Walt Kelly, and I show her Looney Tunes and all this stuff. And I'm like, do you like these? And she's like, I've never seen that before. I'm like, you've never seen that before? And I handed her a bunch of books. I'm like, take these home and study them. Just absorb this. I said, because that's the only criticism that I would say about your work, and you draw great for your age. I said, you might want to try. I said, you would be immensely valuable at your ability if you had a wider scope of how you draw. Because there's a lot of people that are, coming into the industry that all they draw is this anime look. And I'm starting to realize it's because that's all they've seen. And I'm now thinking about it, I'm like, where can kids, young people, see Bugs Bunny? They can't. And I'm not talking about these new cartoons that they make with Bugs Bunny. Those are garbage. And that is a shame, man. Because okay, so when I got into the industry right out of high school, I was the first job I ever had was a character layout artist, um, which was taking storyboards and then doing camera ready layouts on paper for a television show. So we were doing the animation posing, um, camera instructions, and the background. And we used field guides. You remember field guides? Uh, like 12 field, 10 field, 8 field guides, which I've still kept all these years. I don't know why I've got them, but so these you put this, there's the pegs, put this down, put it over a light box, and then there's your field cutoff for a 12 field scene. These things smell. And put the character art in there and make sure that all the poses fit within the scene and can be visible to the camera. That was the first thing that I was ever taught, and it was working for John Chris who later created Ren and Stimpy. And man, that was just a lucky coincidence that that's the first job I got, was doing character layout, because it was really jumping into the deep end of like how to work in animation, and right off the bat I'm learning how to create stuff that looks right under camera. So that's animation posing, that's acting, and that's, to me, that's the fun stuff. So the point is, as the animation jobs were evaporating and going away, uh my this was when my wife got headhunted to produce the VeggieTales movie Jonah, and we moved to Chicago so that she could do that, so she could have that experience. And and I went over there and got a job. The only drawing job that they had available was, well, they had design, but I got into storyboarding, and it was just, again, a just dumb luck that I was suddenly working at a place, and the only thing that I could do was drawing, was storyboarding. And by the way, I had avoided that job. I All of my friends, in especially in television animation, that were board artists were always working crazy overtime and working late into the night to meet deadlines, always. And it just seemed like a hassle and a headache. But I got into storyboarding and, like, immediately loved it. Like the first, like I said, in that video that I gave you to use, the first thing that I did, I was like working on this thing, and I just thought, "Ooh, wouldn't it be funny if I did this?" And I just tried something that was different, and it got a good response, and that was exciting to me. That was when I finally went, "Okay, this is the job I've been looking for." Directing is even better, and I've gotten to do that. I wish I'd get more of it, but because that's the same thing, but on a much bigger level. I mean, I think that somebody just starting out, I think it's not a bad idea to just take a sequence in a movie that you like. If you have no comprehension of how to do story, like no idea of screen direction or camera or layout or anything like that, and you're starting from absolute zero, I would say, put up a movie that you like, and find the sequence in the movie that you like the most, and pause it from frame to frame and draw what's there. I mean, quickly, not with a lot of detail, but just block it out and put things where they are. How to Again, this is the stuff I'll talk about this summer. Is like, how do you build tension with, again, not showing something? Go the scene in Jaws that's so tense, where they've parked the boat and Richard Dreyfuss gets in the water, and you're like, "What are you doing?" And he goes down to swim down to that boat. It's his friend's boat, and he swims down around it, and the guy's head comes out of the side of the boat. Just that, pause each frame, the high angle shot looking down at the boat and the other boat underwater, and how they're laid out, and then the shot of him, going down, and he goes, "I can't get any spit in my mouth for his, to spit into the lens of the goggles," and just pay attention to the dialogue and how it's nobody like the characters aren't saying exactly what they're thinking. That like they Richard Dreyfuss's character says, "I'm scared to death, and I'm really, really nervous." He says all of this emotion in, "I can't get spit enough to wipe my lens." Like he's trying to spit into the goggles to keep him from fogging. And yeah, I mean, just study how they block scenes. But yeah, study stuff like that. How did they get through that scene? How did they tell you what's going on without saying it? It's certainly easier if somebody's like nearby to be able to actually hopefully meet people and get ins that way. And I lucked out in that regard that I met people that were working professionals beforehand. So that doesn't, that's hard to do if you're living in Nebraska, or somewhere in the middle of the country. Yeah, that one came together pretty quickly. I kind of had some idea of where I was going with it. Certainly the scene in How to Train Your Dragon where Hiccup finds Toothless tied up in the forest, and he goes and he says, "I'm gonna cut out your heart and take it to my father." And then he finally can't bring himself to kill the animal, so he cuts him free, and then the dragon jumps on him and roars in his face and then goes away, and then he gets up to walk away and he falls down, passes out. That like when they launched me on that scene, I wrote the scene, like I wrote the dialogue, and I didn't think that they'd keep it, but there was no dialogue. So the whole "I'm gonna cut out your heart and take it to my father. I'm a Viking." That stuff was, you know, I just thought of it, and it all came like they we were the moving. It was like a moving train. We're like laying the track in front of ourselves because that movie had to be done yesterday. And they're like, "Why don't you go work on the scene where Hiccup finds Toothless in the forest?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know what I'll do." And it was there immediately. Like I could play the whole scene in my head. That doesn't always happen, but that one, it seems so obvious. Like uh that's what I would do. It just felt natural. Like what would I do in that situation? I don't know if I could kill a big giant animal like that and stab it and make it die. Um yeah, and that felt right. So that one, before I started drawing it, I knew exactly what I was drawing. And most of the time, uh, I do have a very good idea of where I'm going to go before I start drawing. I do mull it over in my head, and I kind of play it like a film until I can kind of more or less see it, which is interesting. I'll bring up this one last Ed Catmull. If you have not read Ed Catmull's book, Ed Catmull, the guy that started Pixar, have you read his book Creativity Inc? It's fantastic. I got it on my phone from the library, audiobook, and I've been listening to it. Um, and since you're a studio owner, you might get a lot out of it. It's really cool, uh, about how he started in the '70s, in the very, very early days of computer graphics. He made a stir at some national computer related trade show where he built his own hand out of wireframe, uh, and that was revolutionary. Building an object out of wireframe, and then showing how you could, bend it and stuff like this. And so this is in the very early infancy of computer graphics. He was already excited about it, and then he talks about how he got a job at Lucasfilm, and then they started Pixar, and then Lucas himself was going through his divorce, and he needed money, so he was selling off assets, and he sold Pixar to Steve Jobs, and he just goes through his life of running Pixar. But more importantly, he's talking about he specifically goes through why I thought of this, how I sought the solution, and how I found the solution for everything. And I'm talking from solving a complex mathematical computer problem or employee problems, like how to solve people being upset at something and trying to smooth things over and make a cohesive whole, and how they came up with the idea of Pixar and how everybody had an equal voice. And so again, I really recommend it. Somebody recommended it to me a long time ago and they urged me to read it and I didn't. And only recently I'm listening to it. It's great. And Catmull, I met a couple of times when he was still at Disney and I was there before John Lasseter and he left. Ed Catmull sent out a questionnaire, which I think is really interesting. And I'd never thought about this before. He's writing another book and it has something to do with creative individuals and how they form ideas. And he sent out this questionnaire asking people, he goes, I've never been able to picture things in my head. I have to work things out here on the table, on the desk, on the computer, on a drawing. That's how he solves problems. And he asked the artist because he couldn't get his head wrapped around, are you able to see things very clearly in your head? And to me, I'm like, of course. Like, doesn't everybody? And he goes, no, I can't do that at all. And I'm like, really? And so he sends out this questionnaire with this very simple question. In your mind's eye, of course you're at work. Can you walk through your house and count the number of windows in your home? And I'm like, of course. And I counted them. Like there's 36 or whatever. And so he everything about this guy is interesting because he seeks to solve problems on things that I don't think anybody else ever thought about. Like I've never thought about how do other people imagine ideas? I just kind of took it for granted that you must be able to see it in your head. And I guess that's not the case. And I think that's really interesting. So I can't wait to read his book, if he finishes it. So,
Hey Tom, thank you so much for your time.
of course.
Chatting with you. Always cool. I'll put this baby to bed.
Okay.